Ibram X. Kendi is a CBS News contributor and the director and founder of the Boston University Center for Antiracist Research. Ibram, thank you for being here. Professor Kendi, I might call you. I could call you justifiably. You're a great expert to have on a very complex conversation about what happened in Memphis. And I think part of the reason it's complex for a lot of people is one way of looking at it would be you've got a black police chief, you've got 5 black officers, and you've got a black motorist. Race is therefore not a factor, but I know you think that race was central to what happened. Before we get into more of the news, can you tell us why?
So I think we really need to shift our perspective from intent to outcome, and in this case, from the perpetrators to the victims. So the question isn't necessarily the race of the perpetrators, the question is the race of the victims. And so in this case, I think many people are asking the question that if this motorist would have been white, would those black officers have so brutally beat him, to death? And I think you can correctly state that that would not have happened. So that is what makes this a racist incident. And unfortunately, black people are subjected to police violence no matter the race of the cop.
And Ibram, you've written extensively about this, about internalized racism, about the criminalization or the idea that a black or brown body is somehow inherently criminal. I want to talk about police and police institutions and the history of policing. When you look at an incident like this, where do you think the biggest changes need to come from? And of course, this debate goes from everything from abolitionists speaking to people who want to fund more police units.
So I personally wish we would have an even deeper debate or discussion than we're having now, and that wouldn't necessarily involve these larger conversations we're having. That deeper discussion would encompass why do certain neighborhoods have higher levels of, let's say, violence or harm? And I think for too long we have been taught that certain neighborhoods have higher levels of violence because of who is living in those neighborhoods, as opposed to the conditions in those neighborhoods. And so if we begin to see that, the problem, what's causing, let's say, the violence in particularly neighborhoods with high levels of unemployment, particularly long-term unemployment and poverty, are those impoverished conditions, then I think it will cause us to think very differently about solutions. But if we have been led to believe that it's the people themselves, then that leads to a solution of we need more officers in those communities to keep us safe.
As opposed to resources.
Well,
Exactly.
I mean, on that subject, Ibram, if you take that deeper view and you ask yourself, why are these communities poor and why are certain people living in those communities today, and you devise solutions to that problem rather than more officers, where would you begin from a policy perspective?
Well, I would begin with jobs, specifically jobs for youth. Black youth in particular, Black urban youth, have among the highest unemployment rates in this country, or they're forced to work in low-income jobs. So I would start with ensuring that every American has jobs, or even there are all these, Tony, basic income programs that are being piloted in cities across the country. And I remember a study that was conducted, I believe, in Chicago, in which researchers took a group of young Black teens and provided them with jobs and compared them against a group of young Black teens who didn't have jobs. And they found that the teens who had jobs were less likely to be involved in violence. You see this over and over again across the country. So that's where I would start.
Yeah.
Basic income jobs for us all.
Yeah, it's clearly the work not of one conversation or 1 week or even 1 year. And on the subject of making shifts generationally, you are co-author of a new book, an adaptation of your book on anti-racism. This is How to Be a Young Anti-Racist, co-authored with Nick Stone, a best-selling author of fiction for young adults, this being nonfiction and critically important. How did you translate and make comprehensible for younger readers, some of your ideas?
Well, first, let me just say, Tony, that was the purpose. Like, I did not want to assume that young readers would just pick up the original book and it would be relevant to them. So that's one of the reasons why I was excited to partner with a novelist who has written extensively for young adults. And it's really, I mean, the book is written in the second person, so it's written as like Nick sort of telling the story of what happens to me, which I think is a fascinating sort of way for young people to really relate to this text, and it allows young people to see what I experienced and thought as a teenager, which gives them a way to think about what they're experiencing and thinking as a teenager, and more importantly, how they can change and change society.
A direct call to action, if you will. If you're reading it in the second person, it feels more intimate and personal to the reader.
Exactly.
Ibram X. Kendi, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all of your wisdom and insight.
Of course, thank you for having me, as always.